Okay, hello, and welcome to week 7. This week we're going to talk about the role of sexism, misogyny, and misogynoir, all concepts that we'll talk about today in work and the subsequent class inequalities that come from work. Specifically, we're going to be looking at data from a research firm's project that just came out actually a few weeks ago, and I thought it was a good way to think through these issues of sexism, misogyny, and misogynoir, specifically how COVID-19 has been impacting these issues. So let's get started. We ended last week by saying that whiteness is the baseline for work in the United States. Specifically, white maleness is the baseline. If that's true, then that also means that women, by extension, are, or at least we are socialized to believe, are explicitly not suited for work. And people of color are not suited for work. If you think about the beginnings of slavery, the idea of enslaving these African people was rooted in the idea that they were not civilized enough for traditional work and instead needed to be physical laborers akin to animals, right? Because eh, again, it's this idea that suitability for work is inherent in white maleness and nobody else has it. And so, you know, as we move through society, um, we're sort of making some concessions to let women work, to let people of color work, but it's not rooted in this idea founded in American culture that those people, those non-white males, um, um, people who are not white men, I guess I should say, are not suitable for work. They don't have the temperament, the personality characteristics, the skills, the ability to learn particular skills. They don't have any of those things, and so the idea prevails. It's so ingrained in us that we don't necessarily think about it every minute of the day, but that white men are good workers and everybody else is probably not. All right, so let's look at some data about what this means. So first, we have this chart, which tells us that women of all races, ages, levels of education, and political affiliations experience gender discrimination in the workplace. So this is not an issue that can be separated from performing womanhood or being identified as a woman in American society. I'm going to stop here and say that this is where the concept of intersectionality comes in. Intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1990, maybe 89. I'd have to go back and look. But it is a concept that is often used incorrectly. And what it actually means is that women, specifically women who embody other minority identities, have to deal with these intersecting nature of the discrimination and um, what's the word that I'm looking for? And prejudice that comes not just with being a woman, as we're seeing here, all women across all of these groups are experiencing gender discrimination, but also racial discrimination, religious discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, class discrimination. And so when we talk about concepts like misogyny and misogynoir, misogynoir, a coin termed by Moya Bailey, is specifically about that kind of um, racist, sexist combination of discrimination and prejudices that are unique to Black women. And the reason that we have to use concepts like intersectionality and misogynoir as we talk about these issues of gender discrimination is because women across all groups are experiencing it. So now we need to be able to parse out, okay, well, what does that look like for white women? What does it look like for Black women? What does it look like for Latinx women? What does it look like for Asian women? And think about these sort of matrices of power and domination that go into impacting how their experiences of discrimination, in this case in the workplace, differ. All right, let's get into some more data. So on this chart, we are pulling out an example industry, in this case, asset management, and this data is from 2017. And you can see that 1/3 of the women in this industry reported sexual harassment. 3/4, so 75%, reported some sexist behavior in the workplace. And so this is just one industry as an example, but you can see overwhelmingly women are experiencing this sort of gender discrimination in the workplace at very high rates. So it's not just a few women, it's generally a majority of women or close to. This are a visual description of the complex nature of work and navigating work in the United States. For most people who are not white men, if we go back to this idea about white maleness being a baseline for work, that means if you're not that, it's not as simple as just going to college, graduating from college, getting a job, getting promoted again until you retire. Instead, you have to dodge discrimination and sexual harassment. You have to worry about how motherhood is going to impact your position. Are you going to have to opt out of the workforce for a while? Are you going to be thought of differently? Are you going to be passed over for promotions if you have kids? Are you going to be able to tuck them in at night, take them to the doctor, pick them up from school without having to deal with negative repercussions from your work? As you get older, especially for women, you are seen as less attractive and less valuable. How does that impact your ability to get work? And because women are underrepresented in top positions in all industries, how, if you can't at all, do you convince someone, probably a man, probably a white man, to mentor you, to advocate for you? And if all of those things matter to your ability to get a good job and be financially stable as a result, you are going to have to go through all of these twists and turns. Um, what that means, and really what the game is trying to show us, is that the glass ceiling continues to prevail even in 2020. You can see on this chart here that for every 100 men that are promoted, um, 72 women are promoted. Women as a general category, not broken down by race. But when you do break it down by race, you can see here that 58 women, Black women, are promoted for every 100 men who are promoted, and 68 Latina women are promoted for every 100 men that are promoted. So those numbers are below the number for women overall, which means that white women are overrepresented in even that disparate rate of promotions across groups. All right, let's look at this. At every professional level, this chart goes from entry level to senior level. women are underrepresented. And you can see that this is taking us from 2015 to 2020. I said again, this data just came out, so it's great because it includes data from this year. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about entry level or if you're talking about senior level, women are underrepresented. And this data is really interesting when you consider that women are a majority of the American population. So there are more women than there are men, and yet women are underrepresented at every level of professional work, which again means that we have um, a, a culture and an economic system that is rooted on excluding women in a lot of ways from the workforce. Even though we think of, feminism as being a huge deal now, and women having more rights and more power than they ever have, it's still sort of vastly under perform, I guess is the way that you might want to think about it, relative to the amount of space and room we take up in this particular society. Okay, so let's think about how COVID-19 is impacting these numbers. So on this chart, you can see that mothers have reported being more exhausted, more burnt out, and perceive themselves as more pressured to do more work since COVID-19 has started compared to men. Um, Black women and senior level women have, when you pull them out, they have even higher rates compared to their male counterparts. This is an example of the motherhood tax. And in fact, the motherhood tax has been a thing that has been around for a long time. COVID-19 is just highlighting, putting a spotlight on those issues which we were already having a problem with in American society and making them bigger. So in this chart, you can see that in dual career homes, so that means that both people, adults working in the home, um, living in the home, work outside of the home, mothers reported having more hours of responsibilities per day since the onset of COVID. And the number of hours increases as the number of children under 10 years old that you have. You can see that when you look at men with no children and women with no children, there's almost no difference in the amount of hours increase they feel exist in their responsibilities. This makes sense if you think about the fact that school is mostly online now, and for children under 10, that really means that the parents are surrogate teachers and also likely working full time in a job, probably remotely. There's not a lot of um, moving out of that space. There's no escape in a lot of ways from dealing with that day-to-day pressure. And because women were already more likely to do a majority of household work, even in dual career households, the COVID-19 pandemic is just exacerbating those issues. So the motherhood tax often leads to what we call in sociology the mommy track. And my graduate advisor, Phyllis Moen, at the University of Minnesota, has done a lot of research on time and work as it relates to gender and how women end up opting out of the labor force often as a result of being unable to balance the responsibilities required at home, raising children, and taking care of the majority of household labor, which again, we know that most women do, and also meeting the demands successfully of their position while maintaining financial solvency. And that's a big deal because childcare in this country is extremely expensive. I always like to tell the story that I have a friend, and she is a lawyer, and her husband was in IT, and they purchased a home that was about 3,000 square feet, and probably cost them about $350,000. And I remember them telling me they had two kids under 6. And I remember them telling me that they pay more in daycare every month than they pay the mortgage on their home, which means that they're paying for childcare thousands of dollars on top of the thousands of dollars that they have to pay for the mortgage on their home. And many people are just not in a financial position to do that. And when that happens, it's most often the woman who opts out of the labor force and becomes the the child care that they essentially cannot afford. Um, this chart shows us that since COVID-19, there has been an increase in women considering career changes because of that added amount of um, responsibility at home. And it will be really interesting to see post-COVID if these women opt back into the labor force or if they remain out, and what that does to, again, this uh, ideology of the structure of whiteness as the baseline for white maleness as the baseline for work, and what that does long term to the rates of women in higher status and title positions that you need to be in an industry for a while and work your way up to achieve. Okay, I wanted to show you this chart, and it's very similar to a chart that we looked at last week, but that wasn't a chart, it was actually a figure that showed the route of networking and advocacy in professional settings. This is more a set of charts to show that network impacts women in the workplace explicitly because men are less likely to mentor, they're less likely to advocate for, they're less likely to give credit to women at work, and they're less likely to admit their potential gender and race-based biases, which means that they're not going to do the legwork that it would take to create more equality in the workplace, in promotions in the workplace, in salaries in the workplace. Because men control the workplace, that means that there's unlikely to be a lot of change over time in this way, even though we continue to see year after year women continue to be left out of the workforce in very specific and explicit ways. All right, this last chart shows us that Black women are less likely than women and men of other races to feel supported by their managers. And again, this is about that idea of mentorship and the role of mentorship and advocacy in the workplace. If Black women have the lowest rates of perceptions of that advocacy, then they also probably have the lowest likelihood of being promoted, of receiving higher salaries, and of then subsequently achieving the upward social mobility that comes with those things. Okay, that's all that I have for you today. The active learning exercise today is a little less active than normal. I'd like you to listen to the podcast titled A Pink Collar Recession. You can find the link to it on Canvas. Listen and come prepared to talk in class. I'll see you then.